that day, I live in a dream. I live in a dream.
All right, welcome to Only Trying to Help, the podcast where we try to help you be helpful to other people. My name is Dr. Kate Watson, and I'm really happy to be joined by my good friend and my colleague, Dr. Steindl from Australia. Stan knows a great deal about helpfulness and all of those fascinating dynamics that exist when people try to do good in the world or try to do good for others. So, Stan, I wonder if you might begin just by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hello, Kate. Yes, you make me smile big when I hear your introduction. But yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a therapist and trainer here in Brisbane, Australia. And yeah, one of the things that you and I share, I guess, is a love for motivational interviewing and helping people change and sort of trying where we can to understand what is a helpful conversation. How can we actually sort of take part in and sort of facilitate a conversation that really starts to enhance people's motivation and ultimately a commitment to change or action or finding a way to be helpful for them. And I'm also very interested in compassion and self-compassion, I suppose, as well. And of course, that all plays a bit of a role in motivational interviewing, but I'm particularly interested too in an approach called compassion-focused therapy. So those are my two loves, really, actually, is motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy. My two loves, at least professionally, I must admit. Sure. I also have a Labrador, so that's another one of my loves. But yeah.
I'm sure your friends and family would love to hear that your two loves are motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy.
Yes, I might have to keep that on the down low, but yeah.
All right. Well, this will just be between you and me then. We won't share it with anyone else. But, we're smiling because you and I know that from speaking to a lot of people who try to be helpful to others, that so much of what we do is very well-meaning, right? Like I always say, it comes from a good place. This is usually where I start my training. So like just speaking to a group about what does it mean to be well-meaning and coming from a good place. And, you and I have talked before about how that inner drive to help, as kind as it may be, it sometimes gets us into trouble. And so what can you tell us about that from your perspective, given the work that you do?
Yes, I think it comes back to our basic humanity and our tricky brains, really. Because, let's say we have two people, really. We have the person who perhaps is being helped and the person doing the helping.
Yeah.
And so first, the person being helped is probably going through a lot. In fact, sometimes we might be seeing someone, during some of the worst days of their lives, in fact, and so, they're often very threat system activated. Their tricky brain is in fight, flight, freeze, appease mode. And so they're really on high alert for any kind of threat and then sort of responding to that threat with either fight, flight, freeze or appease. And then the person trying to help is well-meaning, as you say, and very concerned for the person that they're trying to help and worried maybe about what might, sort of happen for them if that person continues on this path and so on. And so, actually they become kind of threat system activated too, I think, and so their fight, flight, freeze, appease response is a little bit kind of, activated and starts to motivate them to sort of urge the person or maybe kind of tell them what they really should do, or start to even push them, or even, maybe coerce them. And then, of course, that there then starts to kind of trigger the threat system in the other person, kind of even that little bit more. So all of a sudden we have two people, two humans, kind of with their threat systems just that little bit activated. It doesn't have to even be a lot necessarily, but just that little bit of threat system activation. And now we've got a different dynamic. We've got a dynamic where there's more defensiveness, or maybe there's sort of kind of anger that starts to sort of bubble up, and the sort of the very well-intentioned, well-meaning, often actually on both parts. The person being helped is often there in a very well-meaning, well-intentioned way, as is the person trying to help. But now we're caught in this sort of struggle, really. But it's our brains, it's the brain, the tricky brain, and the way that the threat system, kind of comes in and intrudes and starts to influence the whole dynamic.
Well, I think that's really helpful, because I've heard a lot of people describe, and by people, I mean the helpers out there. I've heard a lot of helpers out there describe this moment, just very much like you have, Stan, as like a siren is going off in my head, and it's saying, danger, danger, danger. I've got to help this person. And and I love your use of the word activated. We get activated into basically survival mode, because this siren is saying, you better do something. You better step it up. And you haven't helped this person yet. And you need to do more, and you should be saying more and trying harder. And those who listen to this, Stan, will never see my hands, what they're doing right now. So I have to describe them. But it's almost like this like strangling motion I'm doing with my hands. Do more, try harder. It's threatening in and of itself. And I've heard a lot of people describe it that way, when here you are just trying to help your friend, help your family member, help a client, help a patient. And yet we're thrown into this, this distress. And I think thinking of it like a siren has really stuck with me.
It's a great metaphor for it. I mean, siren is all about, danger, warning, the threat is coming, or whatever, and this sort of sense that I must act. I must act, really. The motive is a very good motive. It's a threat protection motive. And so, the desire is to reduce or remove the threat. It's just that we're now in that activated sort of state. Sympathetic nervous system, is now kind of upregulating everything. The heart starts racing, and I'm being a bit dramatic there, but sometimes it's actually really like that. We really start to feel very anxious and a little bit panicky about this person that we really would like to help, and the alarm bells are ringing, the sirens are going off. The other bit that you said there, which I think is really key, is we sometimes also start to have a bit of a go at ourselves. You should be doing better. You should be helping this person. You're not doing well enough. You're not doing good enough at helping them. So the initial thing to activate the threat system is our concern for the other person, only to then be compounded by this inner voice, this kind of self-critical voice, or catastrophizing voice, or fearful imagining voice that starts to have a go at ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I was nodding along with that, because as you were describing our threat systems getting activated, of course, I had to wonder, well, what is the threat? What's threatening us? And I have some guesses, and I'll bet you could probably add to my list. But my guesses are things like, is my reputation being threatened if I can't be a helpful person? Is my self-esteem or self-worth threatened if I can't help this person? Is my identity as a helper being threatened if I can't help this person. And those are just the sort of selfish ones. I'm sure there's a much longer list of things that are under attack or feeling threatened that are far more compassionate and caring. But I do hear that slightly more selfish list. I do hear that from a lot of people who say, but I'm a helper, but that's who I am. And I'm a good person and I'm a helpful person. And if my attempts to help fail, who am I? What does that mean about me? And that starts to feel like sort of a threat to one's own self-perception or their identity, especially if it's your professional identity.
Mm. Mm. Yes, I definitely think there's the selfless threats that sort of to begin with. The caring motivation is in the mix as well. We are, as human beings, as tricky as our brains might be, we also have a soothing affiliative system, a part of our brain that is about connecting and feeling safe together and looking after each other, nurturing each other. I mean, we can be a rather, sort of cruel species sometimes, to our own species and even to others. But we have this other part of our brain, this soothing affiliative system that really motivates us to care. Mm-hmm. And so that's in the mix as well. And we can feel real distress in the presence of another's suffering. We actually do very genuinely feel that through our higher order brain functions, really, of being able to empathize and mentalize and really understand what that suffering might be like. So there's a very, very genuine caring aspect which leads to feelings of personal distress. In a sense, there's threat system activation there. But we're also a species that has these self-conscious emotions. Yeah. A whole range of our sense of ourselves, our own personal identity, but especially to how we might be viewed in the minds of others, or how we might be held in the minds of others. And so we worry about that. That's a very big concern because, if the mind of the other views us negatively or disapproves of us or that sort of thing, then the dire consequences might come from that. We might at least be sort of downranked. You mentioned reputation and so on, and so one of the fears and the threat system activating aspects of that is that we get downranked in the sort of the hierarchy. But ultimately, the fear is that we get cast out of the group. And for primitive humans, being cast out of the group meant death, really. Half a dozen of us, well, we can probably shoo away a lion or something, but one of us and we're dead. And so it's sort of a strange thing to imagine, but actually when we're there and we're trying to help someone and we feel very concerned for them, but then we also start to think that we're not doing good enough, we're not actually being good enough in this moment. It's actually no small thing, because it triggers this pathway in the brain, which is actually a fear of being downranked, cast out, and dead.
Wow.
And so, it's really important to start to think about these more self-conscious emotions that can absolutely happen for the helper, feeling guilty maybe, or feeling even certain shame about not being good enough, feeling inadequate, feeling inferior, feeling no good. And those things can just niggle in the back of the mind, I think, of the helper sometimes. And that's really becomes very threat activating as well.
I'm sure our listeners are breathing a sigh of relief that not all of our distress is the selfish type. Whew, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we do genuinely love and care about one another. And then I'm sure they took a deep gasp when they heard that we also fear death as a result of this. Right.
It does seem a bit dramatic, doesn't it?
Just when things were starting to look a little bit better, Stan says, well, this is really all based in the fact that you might get cast off and die. And all jokes aside, I was speaking to someone recently. She's a social worker and a friend of mine, and we were talking about the ways that sometimes helpful people do unhelpful things. I mean, that's what I talk about every day. And she used this phrase that I thought of while you were speaking. She said, sometimes we might make some mistakes, but it's out of self-preservation. And I sat back in my chair and I thought to myself, there's really something to that. When we maybe come on a little strong with our helpfulness, I did air quotes there that no one will see, but you saw them, Stan.
I got it.
But when we come on strong with our helpfulness or do things that end up not being so helpful, might it be coming from this place of self-preservation from time to time?
I think absolutely that's what we're sort of talking about too. We're really there. We have these different motives, I think, and we have the caring motive, but we have the self-preservation kind of motive, the threat protection motive for ourselves, and so sometimes, I mean, especially if you imagine working in a system, and you have to reach key targets or demonstrate kind of outcomes or kind of fix people within 4 sessions or 1 session or whatever it might be, and that actually someone checks, someone's checking, and to see what are your numbers looking like, for example, and that it's going to be brought up next supervision session, that's going to be there, and so you have this person sitting in front of you, and that they're suffering, and that they're also perhaps distressed and got their threat system going, but you have this thing in the background as well that I've got to really get some change here. I've got to help this person. I need them to be better, and not only that, but the last person felt that way, and the next person's going to feel this way as well, and so what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not doing a good job? So and so down the corridor, they get great results with their clients, and what if I'm a bad therapist? What if I shouldn't even be doing this thing? And then all of a sudden, out of our mouths comes something that really, we suddenly have a go at the person. Maybe like you should do this for your kids or something. Yeah. And then we think, oh no, that's wrong. That's not what I should say. And so then we berate ourselves. You see, you're not a good enough clinician. You're a bad clinician. And it's actually, when I describe it, all that, it's pretty stressful sometimes, to be in that spot.
And then imagine you're a mom or a dad or a best friend who has no clinical training at all. Imagine, and you probably don't have to imagine, I know you are a father, but I'm asking maybe all the listeners to imagine then you have no professional training, you have no license in this, and you're also trying to be helpful to others. It's hard for me to even fathom just how much your average person says, I must be a bad friend. I must be a bad mom. I must be a bad parent. I must be a bad spouse because I can't help this person who I love. And I'm actually hoping for them listening that hearing a psychologist say, oh, we have all this training and we too berate ourselves and wonder, am I bad at this? Even with all of the professional training that we have, I wonder if the everyday helpers out there are all saying, oh, so it's not just me.
I think if we capture that phrase that you just said, I think that's a really important one. I must be a bad insert role here. And I think, that if we can bring awareness to that, actually, there's a lot of potential power there, or sort of, like if we can be going, like, for example, I do have kids, and one of my kids is still at school and doesn't like maths. And, we have had, we used to have, I'll give myself a bit of credit, we used to have big arguments about maths, and I would be really trying to sort of, push him into doing some homework, and whatever. And yeah, I can really relate to, I must be a bad dad, because those conversations never went well. And in fact, they never helped him to do more homework, actually, either. So if we can capture that moment where up in the mind comes something like that, I'm noticing myself telling myself I must be a bad dad. Let's stop and think about that. What's the awareness and understanding and kind of wisdom, especially wisdom about our tricky brains, really, what wisdom can I bring to this moment so that I can sort of understand what that's about, soften it a little bit, and have a think, how can I approach this perhaps differently, and so on.
Well, even the way you described that response, you said things like, what wisdom can I bring to that? How can I soften that? How could I think differently about that? It's so different than saying, I have to stop thinking that way, because sometimes we catch ourselves being cruel to ourselves and then yell at ourselves for being cruel to ourselves. Yeah. And so somewhere we have to stop that vicious cycle and offer a little kindness, like, what do I know about this that might be helpful in this moment? That's a kinder, gentler way to break that cycle, rather than saying, I did it again. I'm shaming myself and I have to stop doing that. That's terrible. But that's just doing it all over again.
It's the dragon eating its own tail. Yes. Exactly. But very familiar, isn't it, to all of us? You idiot, like the sort of the self-talk there that can sneak in. We sort of feel like an idiot because of how we just made a mistake in trying to be helpful, and then we feel like an idiot for calling ourselves an idiot, and so on it goes. And and you mentioned, shame and shaming ourselves, and that's that's sort of what it boils down to, isn't it? It's a kind of a helper shame. It's a sort of a feeling that we have, a very, very painful feeling, actually, that we have, that we are inadequate, inferior, worthless, no good. And it's a very common, in fact, universal human emotion, really, isn't it? Shame. But it's also a very painful and causes us a lot of suffering, causes us to really, hang our heads and bury our face in our hands and sort of feel small and want to hide away. We sometimes think that this berating style of talking to ourselves is somehow going to motivate us to do better. But actually, it just all gets internalized as this sort of sense of shame, which really demotivates us, actually, and kind of puts us off the whole thing, and we sometimes feel like, well, I'd almost rather just kind of give up on this whole thing.
It really interrupts our growth. It interrupts any progress we might have been otherwise chasing. It interrupts our activities. It interrupts any healing we would have been doing through those threat activation moments. It just interrupts it. The shame just sort of stops the record on all those things that could have been spinning.
It's like throwing this big gray wet blanket over everything. And it just I mean, but it is universal. We can all sort of relate to shame. It's funny because it feels very isolating and separating and disconnecting, and yet, funnily enough, it's one emotion that actually really connects us all. When we feel shame, one thing's for certain, and that is that those around us probably feel bits and pieces of that too. It actually, it can be something that really creates a sense of common humanity.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about death and shame and a gray wet blanket.
I'm here to make everyone feel better.
and that was my intro to saying, I know, well, I suspect that there's this other side that we could talk about, like the hopeful piece about how to take better care of ourselves when we are receiving help, giving help, whatever that may be, whichever side of that conversation you're on. What is something that you sort of wish people knew about, really thriving in these moments of helping or receiving help rather than struggling so much?
Yes, well, I suspect that you suspected right. That this is where I compassion is the thing, but not compassion across the three flows, and this is one of the things that's really been helpful for me, personally and in the work as well. But just this reminder that compassion flows in three directions. So as a helper, yes, absolutely, there's compassion flowing towards the other person, and when I say compassion, it's really that sensitivity to suffering in that other person, and a motivation and commitment to try to help alleviate or prevent that suffering. That's really at the heart of what we're trying to do there as a helper. I mean, even with my son, the whole idea of wanting him to do his maths is for him to kind of do well and feel good about himself and go on and have a happy and successful life. There's a compassionate motivation there. So there's compassion for others. The second one to think about is that there's also receiving compassion from others. This is the one that helpers often find tricky, opening myself up to receiving it. And shame can get in there sometimes too, because we think, if I need others to help me, then maybe I'm somehow weak, or I don't want people's pity, or it's dog eat dog out there. I should be strong enough to deal with this, or something like that. All these funny little fears, blocks, and resistances come up. But it's really important as helpers to also see, can I practice opening myself up to receiving compassion from others, even little bit by little bit, just sort of practicing that. And then, of course, the third flow is self to self, or self-compassion. And it's because if we were really if we stop and think about it, and we really want to be helpful to another person, we would really never say to them the sorts of things that we sometimes say to ourselves, thinking that it's going to motivate ourselves, the self-criticism, and not only self-criticism, but a very self-attacking, self-condemning, self-hating self-criticism. We'd never say that to someone else if we really genuinely, are sort of wanting to help them. And so, self-compassion is kind of something of an antidote there as well. The way that we treat ourselves, whereby, well, we're sort of sensitive to our own suffering, and we are motivated and committed to trying to alleviate and prevent that as well. This very genuine motivation to alleviate and prevent suffering in ourselves and others. And a really nice sort of catchphrase there, I really use this all the time just with myself, is, may I be helpful rather than harmful to myself and others. That's kind of the little mantra there. And so I feel like that's a key step. How can we cultivate compassion and self-compassion in our lives as we're sort of trying to navigate this helping role?
Well, a few things there, many things are really helpful, but I especially appreciate your use of the word practice. This is something that you practice. I hope that the listeners can hear this is not a switch that you flip one day and one day all your flows are in order. You are, offering compassion to others and receiving it from them and having compassion for yourself, and everything's aligned and balanced and flowing well. It's more something that you practice little bit by little bit to see if you can get, is balance the right word, Stan, to get the balance right?
Well, I think balance is the aspiration, but I think you're right. This is not easy stuff. It's tough. It's even a bit scary, and actually, don't forget too that compassion is a sensitivity to suffering. So it is about working with the suffering that others and ourselves might be experiencing, and so that's tough too. It's no small thing really to be present in suffering. It takes a lot of wisdom, as we mentioned before. It takes a lot of strength and groundedness and calmness. Wherever possible, how can we just practice as well? Calmness and sort of bringing it back to the body and creating that sort of slowing down the body, slowing down the mind. And it takes a lot of courage as well, actually. Like compassion, it certainly has the warmth, the perhaps the gentleness or the nurturing, and it also has the strength and the courage, and the kind of that sense of groundedness as well. And so there's kind of a yin and a yang to it, isn't there? There's sort of the softer aspects and the harder aspects, perhaps, to compassion. And so anyway, yes, as you were kind of you were reflecting, it's the aspiration is balance, but the reality of the daily life is practice. How do we practice this sort of thing? How do we, for example, with receiving compassion from others, a really nice practice is just to see, can I notice little signals from others or little gestures that they might make where perhaps they are offering me a little bit of kindness or a little bit of care. Sometimes we're just kind of like, the shutters are up and we just don't even notice that people are there for us or are offering us these little moments of kindness. So a really great practice is just to sort of wander through our day and just think, can I notice when these little moments are occurring? And at the end of the day, sort of practicing, kind of gratitude and appreciation. I remember that person did sort of reach out to me to be helpful, or, and then of course the next challenge is, all right, so my next practice will be to actually accept that help, to actually open up to receiving that. And when someone says, can I give you a hand with such and such, rather than, oh, no, I'm fine, or whatever, we say, actually, yeah, would you mind? That would be really lovely. Thank you for offering to help. So it does. It takes that bit by bit practice, I think, each day. And of course, across all of the three flows, we think, what intention can I set at the beginning of the day? What can I notice across the day? And what can I really reflect on and feel grateful for at the end of the day in terms of each of these flows of compassion?
I like the idea of a very practical exercise. It's the trainer in me, Stan. I like a very practical exercise like the one you described. And I was thinking, I've kind of gotten out of the habit, but for a little while, I was in the habit of, in the evening, around the time I was going to sleep, thinking about some things that I was grateful for. But they were often things like, I'm grateful that I had hot coffee this morning or something like that. And I was also in the habit of thinking, what good did I do for others today? And thinking about the ways that I did things for other people. And then I would rest on that. And you're making me want to gather those little moments of beauty where maybe someone offered kindness or compassion for me, just mostly to make sure that I'm observing them and that I'm learning to receive them well. And so I think that might be a nice addition to a routine if one has one.
Yes, observing it and appreciating those little moments as well, because actually, they happen. I mean, I kind of, if I think about it, I started off today with that notion, that it all comes back to our basic humanity and
Yeah.
our tricky brains and so on. But the sort of the way through all of that also comes back to our basic humanity. This other aspect, which is about the social, interpersonal, relational part of our species, where we really are motivated to sort of look after each other and to be there for each other and to connect and so on. It can be scary too, especially depending on one's life experiences, for example, or early life experiences, around what it was like to be cared for or not cared for and so on. And that's probably a whole nother conversation. But there is a part of this, of our basic humanity, which is about these three flows. That's what we were designed to do, and in some ways it really is the what's behind the success of our species too, really. is that motivation to look after each other. Things complicated, the tricky brain sneaks in, the threat system kind of, well, it can start running the show sometimes, but also this other part, and these three flows, and we just need to kind of keep that in mind, practice it, explore it, and gradually move towards the balance.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you would mind me asking just more about you specifically. What keeps you going in this work? I mean, you've been doing it for a long time. You must feel like you talk about the flows of compassion a lot. And like, what keeps you coming back to this subject? What draws you to it or lights you up about this topic?
It's a very penetrating question in a way, because it is about trying to think what is it that motivates one to help and motivates one to keep helping. And many of the people that might be listening to this might sort of take your opportunity, to ponder this for themselves too. Like it is a really interesting question. What motivates us to help, and what motivates us to keep helping? And I've been a clinical psych now for 20 something years, and I really do feel no less enthusiastic and kind of motivated by that idea as ever I did. And I think that it's a very powerful feeling and motivation that is deeply held, and we want to sort of be helpful, and we want to try to help people to suffer less and feel not only suffer less but flourish and thrive in their lives. And I think for me too, it's such a rich and deep and interesting field, and you probably never really know everything about it. And so I think that keeps me going as well. I mean, compassion, for example, sometimes we might put compassion on the list of our treatment plan or something, and we're going to do this, and we'll be compassionate, and we'll do this, and we'll do this. But if you actually dive into compassion and what it is, it's a rich, multidimensional, and quite sophisticated concept. Really, it's a sensitivity to suffering in self and others, and a motivation and commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. There is that kind of level of the definition, but it's also about it's about sensitivity, it's about empathy, it's about sympathy and non-judgment and distress tolerance and a care for well-being. And it's sort of, and each one of those is rich with sort of with nuance and detail and so on. And then it actually, there's a whole range of areas that relate to it. So people who are very interested in neuroscience can dive into the neuroscience of compassion, and that's fascinating stuff around around our tricky brains and our central nervous system and the role of parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve, and all of that stuff is fascinating. But for others, it might actually be the spiritual and wisdom traditions and the way that for thousands of years people have talked about and written about compassion and the way that we might sort of treat people and help people and so on. And so there's the deep dive there. And then, of course, you know, the psychological theories for it all, attachment theory and even the cognitive behavioral therapies and the acceptance and commitment therapies and developmental psychology and, of course, evolutionary psychology. And so there's a whole way in there as well. And then, of course, it's just the daily practice, the sitting, the walking, the meditation, the action, you know, bringing it into our daily lives and just trying to kind of embody compassion, you know, sort of standing upright, rolling back the shoulders, opening the chest, looking forward and around, and starting to really cultivate that compassionate motivation. So I've sort of, you know, waxed lyrically there a little bit, but I guess what I'm saying is that it's a beautiful thing, and it's a complex thing, a multidimensional thing. And I find that, you know, you can continue to dive in and explore all of that and learn new things all the time. And that's the real thing that I think keeps me going. And with a constant, the compass always pointing towards being helpful. And you know, being you know, helpful as well as I can and wherever possible.
May I tell you the inspiration for my question?
Yeah.
You know, even though we had sort of joked about the darker subjects that came up earlier, and death and shame and all this heavy stuff and suffering, you know, I was listening to you maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, and I was thinking to myself, Stan still really sees the good in us all. And that's what made me ask the question, what brings you to this work? What keeps you going? Because I guess what I'm seeing in you is that you've dedicated your work to this area around, you know, being sensitive to suffering in others. And yet through all of that, you still strike me as someone who sees all the best in us. And it might have been when you said something about the success of our species, and it raised my sarcastic side when I wanted to be like, how successful have we been, Stan? and because my sarcastic side came up and yours did not, I thought, wow, Stan, you still really see all the good in us. And thank goodness that you do. And my guess is that this work has actually enriched your life, not just your profession, but your life in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I often, in some ways, I trace it back to my granny and some big conversations I had with her, and I've spoken about that before. But yes, absolutely, it's this sense of the good in us, but also the way that we suffer, and you know that it's worth working towards suffering less, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that might be a nice place for us to start to shift out of this. I'd like to end it there. It's worth suffering less.
Yes.
And I know I had checked with you, but I'm going to say now on the recording, you know, if folks do want to get in touch with you or ask you some questions or follow your work in some way, is it all right with you, Stan, if I put your information on our website so people can find it there?
Absolutely, yes. I really enjoy talking about this stuff, and if anyone is interested or would like to kind of engage with all of that, yeah, please do. I'd be excited to hear from people.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for not just spending this time with me, but also your willingness to spend time with the listeners who might reach out. And so I will share that information. And I hope that you do hear from some folks who are kind of catching this bug and maybe want to run with it as well, and interested in the flows of compassion and how we can all work toward this better world where it's worth working toward the end of suffering. Folks, in the meantime, I'm saying this, Stan, now to the listeners. That's why I'm addressing the plural here. In the meantime, I'd love it if people might consider following us on Instagram, where our handle is @IWasOTTH. OTTH stands for Only Trying to Help. And I'm still getting used to making this plug. I'm still really awkward around it, but there's now a book available, Only Trying to Help, and it can be purchased at Amazon. I turn bright red every time I mention it, so that's a conversation for another day. And if anybody has any questions or comments or would like to reach out on this subject or any subject that we cover on the show, you can email me at kate@onlytryingtohelp.com. Thanks so much again, Stan, for your time. I know it's early in the morning for you, so thank you for that.
I appreciate it, Kate. It was lovely talking to you, and I really also appreciate all you do. So thank you.
Take me in your arms. I don't want to miss a day without you. Let's stay young forever. There is nothing we can't do. And nothing can break us apart when we're together. Facing the sky, we know that we can fly on the wings of love. And we can climb on every mountain top. I never knew eternity was real till I met you. Since that day I live in a dream.